Hi, I'm Dr. Francine MacInnis. I'm a clinical and organizational psychologist in Montreal. And I'm here to talk with you today about perfectionism during the COVID pandemic. And I want to talk to you about that because I'm picking up on a lot of perfectionistic vibe out there right now. And I certainly feel you because I picked up on my own inclinations to go down that path myself many years ago and have been keeping my eye on it for a long time now and have some ideas to share with you for how things could maybe go a little bit better, particularly now when the risk is so elevated. And I also want to talk about the fact that this risk is elevated for a lot of people right now. And we're talking about conservative estimates are around 1 in 5 people wrestle with perfectionism, and maybe as high as a third, some would estimate. And that has to do with a lot of things, including, all the expectations in social media to present your best or even perfect self all the time on all fronts, which we know is just not even possible. And secondly, because there's all kinds of feeders to this, whether that's how you were raised in school or raised in your families. There's often that expectation of excellence, but beyond excellence, perfection across a lot of different spheres that fed into this. So you're in good company. And the risk is particularly high right now for a couple of reasons. One is that what underlies perfectionism is a thread of anxiety. It's rooted in anxiety. And the way that perfectionists cope with that is that we have a lot of keen, conscientious contributors who read their landscape to find out what are the ways that I can perform perfectly and keep myself safe and validate that I'm okay, that everything's okay through perfect performance. And so the anxiety right now, given all the disruption, is really high. And the inclination then to go down that path is also very high. But the reason that it's especially hard right now is that these are truly unprecedented times, and there is no playbook. There is no perfection right now. We're all just figuring it out together around how to be in these very strange, scary, and interesting times. So while you might be scanning for what are all the perfect things I'm meant to do, there aren't really very many answers right now. And by the way, there is no such answer because we can't do things perfectly. But the temptation is high to go down that path. So there's a really great in the sense of magnitude and also interesting opportunity right now to be very aware of that inclination to derail and go down that very familiar pattern. But also there's an opportunity, there's really interesting times to go about things in a different way than we normally do. Because these current unprecedented times also create a really interesting sandbox for trying things out and experimenting or approaching things differently that I would like to talk to you about, because there's a really interesting possibility to loosen the shackles, as it were, of perfectionism now and possibly for the long term by taking a really different approach to things. And how is the question then to do that? And it really requires a very different frame around our perceptions, around our standards and expectations to be able to experience things in that way. So here's a few ideas around how to think about things differently. Now, first of all is the fact that things are so imperfect right now in the most perfect way. And what I mean by that is never before has it ever been so visible how imperfect things are. So when we think about all the usual Instagrammable moments and Facebook moments, right now we're having meetings and meetups where we can see people's entire imperfect, messy, chaotic selves and homes as opposed to the usual perfection. And And what's wonderful is that everybody can connect in a more real way with other real people, not perfect people. And that connection can be deeper or stronger than it ever was. So there's this really interesting invitation to connect with people and let that veneer fall away. And certainly in Montreal here, Leonard Cohen is one of our icons. And he talks about that it's the cracks that allow the light to shine through. And it's a really great time to let imperfection fall away, or to let our imperfection show and let our essence kind of shine through that. So to allow yourselves to be vulnerable a little bit more, and to encourage others to as well. Secondly, we need to do less. We're absorbing a lot of disruption. There's a lot of stress. And the inclination for perfectionists is to keep doing everything, all the same things, all the amount of things, and all in the perfect ways like before. And it's not possible. By the way, it never was possible. So to really try and cut yourselves a break, but to do so in a really strategic or thoughtful way, to say, what could I let go or do less of right now that's not as important? And what you do decide to retain, to give yourself some space to not do it perfectly. And it just allows you a little bit of breathing room. Everybody needs a little bit more breathing room. And it breaks that pattern of just being in a frenzy to do all the same stuff as before when it's not achievable. And so that leads me to the third point, is to take a step back and really think about, try and take some time to gather yourself so you can think, and think about, how would you like to be present right now? What are the strengths that you would like to bring forward and offer out? Because behind this scramble, perfectionistic scramble, is really an intention to give, to contribute, to bring skills and support others. And we need to be thoughtful around, what are those strengths that I would like to bring to bear on the current situation, because there's some really great intention behind that just sometimes gets derailed. So do you want to be more present to family? Do you want to be a more empathic boss and cut yourself and your team some slack? Do you want to listen more? Do you want to try things a bit differently? And give yourself a little bit of space from step number 2 of creating some space, so that you can be present during the crisis in a way that you could feel good about now, and also after feel like you honored those values or those intentions by thinking now about how you want to do that. And give yourself all kinds of space to do that imperfectly and mindfully. So fourth point is not to expect to excel. So this when I talked about this being unprecedented times, we are really in a very experimental space when we don't all know what we're doing with it or how to approach this, because we've never done this before. And there's a really interesting researcher called, his name is Eduardo Briceno. I'll put the references in the notes on the site. And he talks about, when people want to get better at something that they're not already good at, they have 2 very different zones. One is a performance zone, where we bring forth established skills masterfully. And that's really an excellence or a performance zone, because we already have the skills and we're trying to bring them forward with excellence. But there's also this other zone, which is where we build skill, and that's called learning zone. And in the learning zone, we're deliberately going into a space that we don't already have mastered. We're building skill, which means we expect mistakes. We deliberately go in and try stuff and break stuff and do things wrong so that we can learn. And then what we learn in the learning zone gets fed back into the performance zone. And there is no way to develop skills and things we don't already know perfectly. So you can think about the current environment as a really big learning sandbox in which you can try things that you've been curious about or interested in building skills in. but with different expectations, which is expected to be effortful, expect to make mistakes, expect that it's not going to go so well, but with repetition and improvement, it'll go better, and then it'll feed into your usual excellence or performance zone later, not now. So put a different frame around it that gives you this experimental sphere, and I think he calls it low stakes islands, where you create a little sandbox in which you get to be experimental with the ultimate goal of feeding into your performance zone, again, not now. Fifth idea is to explore the notion of growth mindset. And this is a notion that Dr. Carol Dweck, a researcher, coined, and you can find her all kinds of great videos by her, and I'll again put the references, who talks about growth mindset. And she distinguishes perfectionism from these excellence strivers. And while the perfectionists make a very small island for themselves where they self-protect because mistakes means that they're not worthy, or imperfection means that they're not worthy, and it causes a lot of suffering, and so they have to avoid new zones of learning or building skill. The strivers ultimately create excellent results, but they expect to have to put a lot of effort. They are open and curious and most interested in where they're making mistakes because they know that's where they're learning. And so she gives this cool description of when they watch people's brains who are more in the perfectionist space or more in the growth mindset. And when the perfectionists go into these zones where they're making mistakes, she talks about the brain looking cold, like it's shut down because it's a very scary space. Whereas for those who are in a more growth mindset, they're curious and their brain just lights up when they're making mistakes because they're learning so much and discovering so much. So it's very engaging. It doesn't shut them down. So I invite you to check out Carol Dweck and her work in a way that's really encouraging of how you can shift. And the beauty is a growth mindset is something that you can learn, and it means when you're making mistakes and experimenting, you're growing all the time, and so you don't have these limitations. And the last point before I let you go is to really think about your expectations around others. So the key to know is that while we expect that others might think they have expectations of us of perfection, those are usually our own expectations, not others. So I would invite you to think about others as collaborators, as coaches, and as allies, and not as critics, and to take a chance to reach out to people who are your worthy rivals or inspirational people who are really good at something that you'd like to get good at, and to reach out to them and ask them for tips, ask them for help, ask them for input. Because if you take that chance, you'll probably find out that there's a lot of generosity out there, particularly right now with people offering all kinds of help. So it's perfect timing for finding out that those people in that social sphere right now are not all critics. A lot of them are coaches and collaborators. So I'm going to leave you with those ideas for now, and also invite you, because we're doing some free online sessions, and we'll be doing this one with the Montreal Therapy Center, and you can sign up for a live stream session that we're going to do to answer your questions and talk to you some more about these ideas. So hopefully there's a few pointers in here that can work for you, and I hopefully will look forward to seeing you at the online event. Take good care. Bye-bye.